Well, hello, Juanita. We're glad to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you for sure.
Well, you know what? I am so excited about your book, Learning to Be, Finding Your Center After the Bottom Falls Out, because I believe it's so powerful and the truth is so needed in our world today. Because as you mentioned, we're in a world of do. And we need to learn to be who God created us to be. Now, at the beginning of your book, you talk about the crash, okay? Can you kind of just bring us up to speed on that and how that impacted you and affected you?
Sure. The reality is this. We all come to adulthood with a story, a narrative that we've told ourselves.
Right.
The narrative that I had told myself was that I was a good little girl, a rule follower, a perfectionist, needed other people's acceptance and approval. Ministry was the perfect place for an addicted, performance-oriented person like myself.
Uh-huh.
It was the perfect place for a person who was addicted to other people's acceptance and approval. I was like a crack addict in the crack house. And the reality is, I got to a point where I couldn't get the high anymore. And so literally one day I woke up, prepared breakfast for my family the way we normally did. We tried to make it special because we didn't know when we would eat the next meal together because our lives were so busy. My husband and I were in the 7th year of our church plant. We started with 9 members. At that point, we had about 3,000. And so I got up that morning, fixed breakfast. My husband came in, we ate breakfast, and then he said, "Would you like me to take the girls to school?" And I said, "Sure. That way I can put my mascara on in the bathroom mirror instead of the rearview mirror, you know?" And so I hugged them all. They left. I went into the bathroom to apply my makeup, and then I felt sick. A feeling that just kind of came out of nowhere. I thought, well, maybe I just moved around too fast that morning, but I felt horrible.
Wow.
So I called our secretary, told her I wasn't feeling well. And I said, maybe if I just lay down for a couple hours, I could come in at noon. And so I hung up the phone. Then, like an out-of-body experience, I saw myself pick up the phone, hit redial, and say, "I'm not coming back today. I'm not coming back. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a sabbatical or a medical leave or something." And then I got in the bed and I proceeded to sleep 18 to 20 hours a day.
Wow.
For months.
Wow. Well, I know that, in your book, you talked about that you developed an identity around being the good girl.
That's exactly right.
Doing everything right. And pleasing everybody.
That's right.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
It's like a good way to die quickly, trying to make everybody happy, trying to please everybody. And for me, I came to realize that was partially part of my personality type. When you look at the Enneagram, which helps us to see when we're at our best, how we present an image of God, and when we're at our worst, we fall apart.
Right.
Well, at my best, I was trying to, unconsciously, of course, I was trying to represent that which is the perfection of God, but it gets distorted because it started as a child.
Right.
And so that distortion for me became, if I can do good, then I will be seen as perfect. It meant lots of rule following. It meant needing other people to pat me on the back. I was a great teacher's pet, all that kind of stuff. And then it doesn't stop in elementary school.
Right.
I took that framework, that narrative into my first 7 years of employment, which I sold securities and mutual funds. So that was another great place where you get lots of rewards, lots of affirmation, lots of pat on the back. So the reality is we all have a narrative. And at some point, that narrative gets challenged. For me, the crash represented the day that narrative stopped working.
Yeah. And you talked about living by rules.
Yeah.
And you developed rules. And you also mentioned about the fact by living by those rules, it also brought out an attitude of judgmentalism.
Oh,
towards other
absolutely.
people. Talk to us about
Yeah.
that, because that's really powerful.
Well, see, the deal is this, that if you're the good little girl, then that means somebody is the bad little girl and the bad little boy. And so constantly in my head, I was always judging who's in and who's out, is the way Dallas Willard talks about it in The Divine Conspiracy.
Right.
Who's going to be the person that gets the reward and gets, if you will, if we really take it deep, who's going to get into heaven and who's not?
Wow.
Because I accepted Christ as a young child, and my picture of God was this cross between Judge Judy and Santa Claus, and both of them could send you away or not give you the good stuff, you know?
Right.
And so for me, not having challenged that narrative, I took it with me into ministry. I took it with me into my marriage. I took it with me into raising my children. So my kids had to be perfect, not
Wow.
because I wanted them perfect, but because they were a reflection of me.
So I would imagine, Juanita, that caused a lot of stress in your marriage, in
Of
your
course.
parenting, and in your own life.
Exactly. But the reality is, for me, I didn't really have the awareness until the crash happened. Because now all of a sudden, all those rules that I had been trying to live by, they didn't do anything for me. They didn't get me out of bed. They didn't make me feel better. They didn't help me have energy. They didn't help me to know that I had a life outside of doing.
Wow.
That I was called to be a human being, and that my being really was in God.
Right. So talk to us a little bit of how you went about discovering those false rules, because I know that I battle that, and everyone listening to you and I share battle that, and it's really, really big in the church,
Absolutely.
especially when we hear the truth that it will set you free. And yet
Right.
what happens is many of us come to Christ, we start going to church, and we begin to think, I think I was freer before Christ
Yeah.
than what I am
Yeah.
now. So
Yeah.
how did you discover those false rules in your life?
Well, let me tell you a couple of things that happened for me. Number one, after a few weeks of not being able to get out of bed, my husband said, baby, I think you need to see a doctor. And so I went to see my primary care physician. She ruled out all the other kinds of illnesses that mimic depression. So she ruled out diabetes, thyroid issues, all of that. She ruled it out. Then she said, after some blood work, I think you need to see a psychiatrist. And so when I went to see the psychiatrist, I was given medication to help me with what I was diagnosed with was a major depressive episode. And then she said, the psychiatrist said, now you need talk therapy. I suggest you see somebody every 2 weeks. And so I started seeing a therapist. It was in therapy, and it was also in the long days of being at home alone while my children were at school and Rudy was at church. That silence and that solitude became the place where I began to hear the Spirit speak to me about my underlying story and how it had played out and created this disorientation in my life.
Wow. So would you say there was other things that helped you along the way that might be able to help someone today,
Absolutely.
in coming out of the crash?
Sure, absolutely. So number one, please get help.
Right.
This is a process that requires professional help. Unfortunately, and you know this, most of us as pastors, we are not trained to help with mental health challenges. I mean, you wouldn't go to your pastor and ask him to take your cancer out. So don't go to your pastor necessarily
Right.
For that.
Right.
So getting professional help is number one. Number two, one of the things that became so real for me is that God helped me to see that I had been basing my relationship with God, little g God, on rules. But God was more interested in relationship.
Right.
And so God kept showing up for me day after day in different ways. One of the ways was one day I was laying in bed and I could not get out. I couldn't remember how to go to the restroom. I didn't know what part of my body needed to function to get me there. And I laid across the bed And I heard the Spirit say, look at you. You can't do anything for me, but I love you. But the
Wow.
way I internalized it, because of my seeing God as a cross between Judge Judy and Santa Claus, I saw it as punitive. I saw God was punishing me.
Yeah.
Here it is. This depression is because I didn't serve God well, right? I'm so glad I couldn't get out of the bed that day, because the longer I laid there, the more God broke it down. Juanita, that's not what I said. That's not how I said it. What
That's
God
good.
said to me was this: Juanita, you have identified your life as being that of doing. There's nothing you can do for me that will make me love you any more than I already love you.
Right.
What I really want from you is not your doing, not your rules, not the judgment, but what I'd like is for us to have a relationship,
Wow.
you and me.
So Juanita, tell us what helped you regain yourself and perspective from the crash.
Well, you know, there were a number of things. One, there's the practice called the examen. The examen was established by St. Ignatius of Loyola from the early church fathers and mothers.
Yep.
And that practice says that at the end of the day, you ask the Spirit to help you review your day. And you say, what gave me life? What got me excited? What fed me? What nurtured me? And then you do more of those things. The second part was that you ask the Spirit to take you back through the day and look for what drained you, what took life from you, what wasn't life-giving. And then you notice those and you make decisions about how you might change the way you think about those things or discontinue them. All right?
That's
and
good.
then you give God thanks.
Yeah.
Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living.
Right. That's good.
And so the examine invites us to notice what we're noticing. I had not been noticing what was draining me. That calling Sister Johnson, she was going to talk to me for an hour and I would leave exhausted.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I wasn't
yeah.
noticing those things.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the key tools. A second tool, meditation. Daily, having some quiet time where I'm not talking to God, I'm just being with God.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You know, Juanita, you mentioned the fact that we shouldn't run from depression or from fear, but we should be asking, what are you trying to teach me about me? And so that I can grow and be able to deal with it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Be happy to. So here's what I realized. Just as the chrysalis goes into the darkness, the caterpillar goes into the darkness of a chrysalis and dies to itself, liquefies, loses its life. The chrysalis becomes the place where the caterpillar is experiencing transformation. The darkness of depression is not so that we contemplate suicide.
Right.
The darkness of depression is there as a teacher. And so the opportunity is for us to, instead of trying to outrun the depression, to turn to it and say, why are you here?
Right.
And what do you want to teach me?
That's good.
And I say that not just about depression, but about despair, divorce, a diagnosis of a health nature, finding ourselves unemployed, whatever it is that's showing up as the space of disorientation.
Wow.
We're invited to say, what are you here to teach me? This is called the dark night of the soul. It is the place where we are letting go of our lives being led by the ego and those childhood narratives. Thomas Merton calls it the childhood happiness program.
Right.
We all create a story.
Right.
And then we try to live it out. And in some cases, that story is the undoing of us.
Right. That's so true. Well, I know that you are learning to be. And so just talk to us now about how life is for you as you continue on this pathway of learning to be.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I found out is that all the rules that I had created separated me from joy.
Oh, wow.
Separated me from excitement and pleasure. Everything was just a task to be accomplished instead of an experience to be lived.
Wow.
And so what I'm learning to do is what Acts 17:28 says, in him, in God, we live and move and have our being. And so what I'm turning up in my life is joy. I'm turning up, setting goals that have to do with things I enjoy, I want to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's a chapter in Learning to Be about skydiving.
Yeah.
It was something I had always wanted to do, but people around me were fearful. And so often we acquiesce our own inner sense of self, our own inner sense of joy and deep, may I say, ecstasy and pleasure.
Yeah.
These are gifts from God.
Right.
And we find ourselves turning them off because somebody says, please don't do that. You might kill yourself.
Yeah. That's really.
So I'm turning up the joy in my life.
That's really, really good. Well, I can tell it, I can see it in your eyes and in your face and in your beautiful smile. And Juanita, I just want to thank you for sharing with us and sharing your life and being vulnerable. Because if there's one thing that all of us need, it's to learn to be, because too many of us are doers and we put our identity there. So thank you so much for the gift that you have given us, and God bless you.
Thank you, and God bless you and your audience as well.